What if I told you there's a 100% legal strategy that lets extremely wealthy people live off millions, pay almost no taxes their entire lives, and then pass everything to their kids tax-free when they die? No offshore accounts, no illegal loopholes, no secret islands. This strategy has existed in the US tax system for over a century, and it explains why billionaires often pay lower tax rates than teachers and nurses. Once you understand how this actually works, you'll never look at wealth, taxes, or playing by the rules the same way again. Point 1. How the wealthy buy assets and avoid taxes from day one. The biggest tax advantage rich people use isn't hiding money, it's choosing what kind of money they never earn in the first place. Most people think taxes are something that happens after you make money. You earn a paycheck, taxes come out. You sell an investment, taxes follow. That's how life works for almost everyone. But wealthy people play a completely different game. They structure their money so taxes often never trigger at all. The first step in that game is what's known as the buy phase, and it starts with a simple but powerful shift. They stop prioritizing taxable income and start prioritizing appreciating assets. Here's why that matters. When you earn income, salary, bonuses, freelance pay, the government taxes it immediately. Federal tax, state tax, payroll tax, Medicare, Social Security. Before you even touch your money, a big chunk is gone. This is why it feels like running uphill just to save. Wealthy individuals try to avoid this type of income as much as possible, not because income is bad, but because it's tax inefficient. Instead, they focus on assets that quietly grow in value without producing regular taxable cash flow. Things like growth stocks that don't pay dividends, real estate that appreciates over time, private company equity, art, collectibles, or ownership stakes in businesses that reinvest profits instead of distributing them. The key idea is this: unrealized gains are invisible to the IRS. If an asset rises in value but isn't sold, no tax bill shows up. A portfolio can grow by millions on paper and still generate zero taxable income. As long as nothing is sold, the tax system simply waits. Compare that to how most people build wealth. You work, you get paid, you're taxed, you save what's left. Maybe you invest a little, maybe you sell something later and get taxed again. The system hits you at every step. The wealthy flip that sequence. They buy assets first. They let them grow for decades. They delay taxes indefinitely. This isn't a loophole, it's a core feature of the tax code. Capital gains taxes only apply when gains are realized, meaning when you sell. If you don't sell, the government can't tax appreciation. That single rule explains an enormous amount of wealth inequality on its own. Now here's where it gets even more important. The wealthy don't just buy any assets, they deliberately avoid assets that throw off taxable income every year. Dividends, interest, rental income, all of that creates annual tax friction. Instead, they favor assets that grow quietly in the background. Growth stocks over dividend stocks. Businesses that reinvest profits instead of distributing them. Real estate where value appreciation matters more than monthly cash flow. Why? Because every dollar of taxable income is a dollar that can't compound fully. If an asset grows 8% per year, but you lose 2% annually to taxes, the compounding engine slows down dramatically over time. The wealthy obsess over this drag because they're thinking in decades, not months. Another subtle advantage shows up here: time. When you're not forced to generate income to live, you can afford to wait. You don't care about short-term market swings. You don't panic during downturns. You don't sell because you need the money. Your assets can ride out volatility and recover. That's the real power of the buy phase. It's not just about buying assets, it's about buying freedom from forced decisions. And this is why the tax gap between the wealthy and everyone else keeps widening. The system rewards ownership far more than labor. If your wealth comes from assets that grow quietly, you're playing a game where taxes are delayed, minimized, or sometimes erased entirely. Once you understand this first step, the rest of the strategy starts to make sense. Because if you never sell your assets, the obvious question becomes: Point 2. How the wealthy borrow their way to tax-free living. The richest people don't spend their money. They borrow against it and let someone else worry about the taxes. Once wealthy people finish the buy phase, they run into a problem that sounds impossible at first. If all their wealth is tied up in assets they never sell, how do they actually live? You can't pay for houses, cars, or daily life with unrealized gains on paper. This is where the strategy shifts into the most powerful and misunderstood phase: borrowing. Here's the key idea most people never learn. Borrowed money is not taxable income. If a bank gives you a loan, the IRS doesn't treat that cash as earnings. It doesn't show up on your tax return. It's invisible for tax purposes. That single rule is the backbone of how wealthy people fund their lifestyles. Once someone owns large appreciating assets, stocks, private equity, real estate portfolios, those assets become collateral. Banks are happy to lend against them because wealthy clients are low risk and extremely profitable. Instead of selling assets and triggering capital gains taxes, the wealthy simply borrow against what they already own. Modern banks even have specialized products for this. Securities-based lines of credit allow people to borrow directly against investment portfolios. No selling, no realizing gains, no taxes triggered. Here's what that looks like in real life. A wealthy investor owns $5 million in appreciating assets. The bank might allow them to borrow 60 to 80% of that value. That's $3 to $4 million in cash, delivered tax-free. That money can be used for anything: homes, cars, businesses, travel, lifestyle spending. From the government's perspective, none of it counts as income. Now here's the part that feels unfair. The interest rates on these loans are often lower than what normal people pay for mortgages or credit cards. Why? Because the loan is secured by valuable assets. The richer you are, the cheaper borrowing becomes. And while the borrower is paying interest, something important is happening in the background. The assets keep growing. If the portfolio grows at 7 to 8% annually and the loan interest is 4 to 6%, the math still works in the borrower's favor. Their net worth increases even while they're living off borrowed money. This creates a powerful feedback loop. Assets grow, borrowing capacity increases. Borrowing capacity increases, lifestyle funded without selling. No selling, no capital gains taxes. No taxes, faster compounding. It's a self-reinforcing system that only works at scale, but when it works, it's incredibly effective. Another subtle advantage: flexibility. Loans don't have a deadline like selling assets does. Wealthy borrowers can refinance, extend, roll loans forward, or restructure them as asset values rise. They aren't under pressure to pay it all back quickly. Time works in their favor. Meanwhile, most regular people experience debt very differently. Their debt is used to survive, not optimize. Credit cards, auto loans, payday lending, all high interest, all draining wealth instead of preserving it. That's the difference. For the wealthy, debt is a tool. For everyone else, debt is usually a trap. The tax system reinforces this gap. Interest on loans can often be deducted in certain structures. Borrowing doesn't trigger income taxes. Asset appreciation isn't taxed unless sold. So, the wealthy avoid selling as long as possible. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, but this can't go on forever. What happens when all those loans stack up? What happens when the person dies? That question leads directly into the final and most controversial part of the strategy, the part that explains how entire fortunes pass through generations without ever being taxed. Point 3. Why death erases taxes. the part that locks wealth in forever. The most powerful tax break in America doesn't happen while you're alive. It happens the moment you die. This is the part of the strategy that feels unreal the first time you hear it, because up until now you might still be thinking, okay, borrowing avoids taxes for a while, but eventually the bill has to come due, right? For normal people, that's true. For wealthy families, the tax system has a final reset button built in, and it's called stepped-up basis. Here's the rule in simple terms. When someone dies, their assets don't transfer to heirs at the original purchase price. They transfer at current market value. That one sentence is everything. Let's slow this down because this is where decades of taxes quietly disappear. Imagine someone buys an asset for $100,000. Over 30 or 40 years, it grows to $5 million. If they sold it while alive, they'd owe capital gains tax on $4.9 million, federal tax, state tax, possibly additional surtaxes. But if they never sell and instead die holding the asset, something incredible happens. Their heirs inherit that asset as if it was bought at $5 million. Not $100,000, not $1 million, not somewhere in between. The entire lifetime of appreciation, decades of gains, is erased for tax purposes. From the IRS's point of view, those gains never existed. That's what stepped-up basis means. Now, connect this back to borrowing. Throughout their life, the wealthy person borrowed against their assets to fund everything: housing, lifestyle, businesses, investments, living expenses. They never sold. They never triggered capital gains. When they pass away, the heirs inherit the assets at full market value. At that moment, the family can do something incredibly clean. They sell just enough assets to pay off any outstanding loans. Because of stepped-up basis, selling triggers little to no capital gains tax. The remaining assets stay intact, tax-free. The loans disappear, the taxes disappear, the wealth remains. This is why the strategy works across generations. The die phase isn't morbid, it's structural. It's the moment the system resets in favor of the wealthy. Here's why this matters more than most people realize. If wealth is earned through wages, it's taxed immediately. If wealth is earned through appreciation and never sold, it can avoid tax forever. And because borrowing replaces income, wealthy families can live comfortably without ever realizing income. That's the core imbalance. This is also why raising capital gains tax rates doesn't fix the problem. If someone never sells, the rate doesn't matter. If gains are wiped out at death, the rate doesn't matter. If borrowing replaces income, the rate doesn't matter. The system doesn't tax ownership very aggressively, it taxes transactions. The wealthy simply stop transacting. Over generations, this compounds into something massive. Each generation inherits assets at a fresh, higher starting point. Each generation borrows against those assets instead of selling. Each generation passes them on again, reset once more. This is how fortunes last 50, 80, 100 plus years without ever being meaningfully taxed. Meanwhile, families that rely on wages pay taxes every single year, every single paycheck, with no reset button. That's why wealth inequality isn't just about income gaps, it's about tax structure. And this explains something people often wonder about. Why do wealthy families seem untouched by crises that destroy everyone else? Because their wealth is built not on cash flow alone, it's built on assets that grow quietly, shielded by time and law. Understanding this doesn't mean you can suddenly use the strategy yourself. This only works at scale. But once you see it, you stop blaming yourself for not getting ahead fast enough. You realize you're playing a completely different game with completely different rules. And there's one more layer to this. the part that shows why this system keeps getting stronger, not weaker, over time. Point 4. Why the system keeps rewarding the rich and gets stronger over time. The real advantage of wealth isn't money, it's access to rules that multiply themselves. By now, the buy, borrow, die strategy probably feels less like a clever trick and more like a built-in feature of the system. And that's exactly what it is. What makes this strategy so powerful isn't just how it works once, it's how the system actively reinforces it the bigger your net worth becomes. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The financial system is designed to compete for wealthy people, and competition means better rules, cheaper access, and stronger advantages. Let's start with lending. Banks don't see wealthy clients the way they see normal borrowers. A regular person applies for credit and gets interrogated. Income verification, credit score scrutiny, debt-to-income ratios. One missed payment and the terms get worse. Wealthy borrowers are treated completely differently. When someone has millions in assets, banks approach them, not the other way around. Financial institutions want their assets under management, their borrowing activity, their long-term relationship. That means lower interest rates, flexible loan terms, higher borrowing limits, fewer restrictions. As portfolios grow, borrowing becomes cheaper, not more expensive. This creates a compounding advantage that most people never experience. The richer someone gets, the less they pay to access money. Now, add asset appreciation. Because wealthy individuals don't sell assets, large portions of the market become effectively locked up. Stocks, real estate, private equity, they stay held for decades. That reduces supply and increases scarcity. Scarcity pushes prices up. So the same behavior that avoids taxes also contributes to rising asset values, which benefits people who already own assets and hurts those trying to buy in later. This is why the system accelerates inequality over time. Ownership creates leverage. Leverage creates growth. Growth creates access. Access reinforces ownership. Next, look at financial products. Most everyday investors are pushed toward taxable brokerage accounts, high-fee funds, frequent trading, short-term decisions. Wealthy individuals get access to private funds, structured lending, low-cost institutional investments, customized tax strategies. These aren't secret, they're just gated by wealth thresholds. The same is true for tax planning. Middle-class families rely on basic deductions and credits. Wealthy families build entire structures, trusts, holding companies, asset location strategies that reduce taxes year after year without breaking laws. Not loopholes, design. And here's the key insight. Policy changes rarely disrupt this system. Why? Because it's deeply embedded in how ownership is taxed. Income is visible. Transactions are visible. Long-term ownership is quiet. As long as gains are unrealized, they're largely untouchable. As long as borrowing replaces selling, income disappears. As long as stepped-up basis exists, generational transfer resets the board. Even political pressure struggles here. Raising income taxes doesn't affect people who don't rely on income. Raising capital gains taxes doesn't affect people who don't sell. Closing loopholes doesn't change structural incentives. That's why this system survived over a century. It adapts without breaking, and this creates a psychological divide. People who earn income think in terms of monthly cash flow. People who own assets think in terms of decades. Time becomes the real advantage. This also explains why wealthy families can survive crashes that devastate others. Market drops don't force selling when borrowing capacity and long-term holdings exist. Volatility becomes a nuisance, not a threat. Meanwhile, people living paycheck to paycheck experience every shock as a crisis. Same economy, different rules. Understanding this isn't about resentment, it's about clarity. Once you see how the system compounds advantages at the top, you stop expecting fairness from income alone. You start understanding why asset ownership, not effort, determines long-term outcomes. And that leads to the most important question of all. If you're not ultra wealthy, what are you actually supposed to do with this knowledge? Point 5. What this means for you. How to think like the system without being ultra wealthy. You can't play the rich people's game yet, but you can stop playing the losing one. By now, one thing should be very clear. Buy, borrow, die is not a tactic for regular people. You don't unlock it with motivation, hustle, or a better budgeting app. You unlock it with scale. But here's the mistake most people make after learning this. They either get angry and shut down, or they try to copy the surface behavior without the foundation. Both paths lose. The real value of understanding this strategy isn't copying it directly. It's learning how the system actually rewards behavior and adjusting your decisions accordingly. Let's talk about what does apply to you. The first mindset shift is this. Income is fragile. Ownership is durable. Most people are trained to optimize income, raise, promotion, side hustle, overtime. All of that helps, but it's taxed immediately and stops the moment you stop working. The wealthy don't ignore income, they just don't rely on it long term. They convert income into assets as fast as possible. You may not be able to buy private equity or borrow against a $5 million portfolio, but you can shift your focus from spending to ownership earlier than most people do. That means prioritizing assets over lifestyle upgrades, favoring things that grow quietly over things that look impressive, and thinking in decades, not months. The second takeaway is about tax friction. Taxes are not evil, but unnecessary taxes are expensive. Most people accidentally maximize taxes by trading too often, selling assets instead of holding, ignoring tax-advantaged accounts, or chasing short-term wins. While you can't erase taxes like the ultra-wealthy, you can reduce friction. Long-term investing beats constant activity. Tax-advantaged accounts matter more than clever picks. Holding beats hopping. The system rewards patience far more than intelligence. Third, understand the role of debt without romanticizing it. Debt is not inherently bad or good. It depends on who controls it. For most people, high-interest debt equals wealth destroyer. Forced debt equals stress amplifier. For the wealthy, low-cost debt equals liquidity tool. Optional debt equals flexibility. Your job is not to borrow like the rich, it's to avoid debt that removes your choices. Before you invest aggressively, you need margin. Before you chase returns, you need stability. Before you take risk, you need time. This is where many people go wrong. They try to invest like the wealthy while living one emergency away from selling everything. That's backwards. The fourth lesson is about not selling your future too early. Every time you sell an appreciating asset to fund consumption, you reset compounding. The wealthy avoid this almost obsessively. You don't need to copy their scale, just their restraint. If you build something that grows, protect it, give it time, don't constantly interrupt it. Wealth isn't built by how fast you add money, it's built by how rarely you pull money out. Finally, the most important lesson. The game is not fair, but it is predictable. Once you understand how incentives actually work, you stop taking bad deals personally. You stop chasing shortcuts. You stop believing every get-rich-faster story. You realize the system rewards patience, ownership, time, and scale, and punishes urgency, constant movement, and visibility over substance. That's not comforting, but it's useful. You don't need to beat billionaires at their own game. You just need to stop playing a version that guarantees you lose. And that's the quiet power of understanding buy, borrow, die. Not to imitate it, but to finally see the board clearly. So here's the real takeaway. The system isn't broken by accident. It's working exactly as designed. The ultra-wealthy don't win because they're smarter. They win because they understand the rules earlier, and they play a longer game. You don't need to be angry about it. You need to be aware of it. Once you see how money, taxes, and ownership really work, you stop making emotional decisions and you start making strategic ones. If this video helped you see the game more clearly, subscribe to Mr. Dollar because this channel is about understanding money the way the system actually uses it, not the fairy tales we're sold. And comment below, "I see the board now," if this finally clicked for you.